at that point, it was decided that the council was going to be moving forward in Amendment 16 with groundfish sectors, which had already been approved by Amendment 13, and a day at sea system and modifications to the day at sea system. And those were going to be the two management options in Amendment 16 to comply with new 2006 Magnuson requirements.
The good thing about Amendment 16 of the Groundfish Plan, leaving a lot of detail to be worked out, is that the agency and sector managers worked really, really closely on the design pieces, and that there are a number of ways to modify design before it ever has to go back to the council processes, which is pretty lengthy and unwieldy.
At the highest level, Congress sets things. Congress picked a 10-year rebuilding timeline. Congress decided that we should have annual catch limits and accountability measures. The council decides how to set those up, and it, in this case, decided it wanted sectors and a common pool to run simultaneously. NIMS helps them do that, make sure that the ways they do it and what they put in that plan comply with all the requirements and associated laws, and then we implement those.
The Catch Share program is a national program that is being implemented out of the office of the administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Jane Lubchenco. There are a small number of catch share fisheries in the United States and around the world, but it is now the policy of the Obama administration to put catch shares into place in as many fisheries as possible, as quickly as possible.
So the catch share systems that are being put in place in the United States vary from place to place. They're developed by the regional fishery management councils. Basically, the one sort of thing they have in common is that they are all a kind of catch share system that we would look at, which is sort of like a privatisation system. So you look at New England groundfish fishery, they've designed an approach called sectors.
What they allow is basically an economic mitigation for the impacts of the regulations. Those people that want to can voluntarily join a groundfish sector. And groundfish sectors are a type of catch share. One of the things about catch shares is there's no statutory or regulatory definition of that word. It's a broad-based term that basically refers to any output control system. Any time that you're basically going to have a quota-based system where you divide it up among either individuals or groups or segments of a fishery. That's a catch share. So within that, yes, groundfish sectors are absolutely a catch share.
One of the main issues with this upcoming conversion is the confusion over what this new program actually is. The New England region will technically be considered a sector system that divides up the resource into shares based on the total allowable catch limit for that year. Within the frame of a catch share, there are many possible types of systems that could be implemented, including Limited Access Privilege Program, LAPP, Individual Fishing Quota, IFQ, or Individual Transfer Quotas, ITQ. Where the confusion lies is that while these programs are technically types of catch shares, they allocate shares to an individual fisherman as opposed to a collective group. The sector system in New England gives allocation to a group, which then is broken down into shares for the members of the collective, so it is not considered an LAPP, IFQ, or ITQ.
There's a substantial amount of confusion of what are sectors. We actually want there to be more statements coming out from the National Marine Fisheries Service saying that this may be a catch share, which is defined by a whole host of different management programs, including individual transferable quotas or ITQs, but it's not for keeps.
They differ from individual fishery quotas or individual transferable quotas that people are more familiar with and tend to be what people think of when they hear the phrase catch share. Unlike an individual fishery quota, no permanent allocation is made to any individual. In fact, no allocation is made to an individual at all. The sectors that are formed are collective groups. They're voluntary groups of fishermen. And what happens is they write a contract amongst themselves and they develop an operations plan about how they would like to operate as a group within the fishery. We allocate them a portion of the annual catch limit or the total quota that's going to be allowed for the fishery. The amount that they receive is based on the collective history of the members. And so they are a form of catch share because we're taking a share of the total allowable catch and parsing it out to the sectors or to the common pool, which are the vessels that choose not to be in a sector. So that's a catch share, but because the individuals aren't receiving any allocation from NIMS, and because it's not permanent, and because it doesn't apply to the whole fishery, it's not an IFQ or an ITQ. And I think that confuses a lot of people.
The most fundamental aspect of that change is that we will be making a transition from managing fishing from something that is referred to as input control to output control. So that means that we will now be regulating the fishery in terms of the amount of fish that are taken out of the water, and instead of regulating how much time people are spending fishing. So individual groups of fishermen, cooperatives that are known as sectors, will be given the privilege to harvest a particular amount or quota of fish.
We perceive sectors not as an allocation tool to get around the referendum requirements or the LAPP requirements in Magnuson, but we believe that sectors are a management tool, and that's, you know, they are a form of a catch share, but it's not, the fishery has not been allocated in that form. So we're developing sectors as a management option for fishermen to be able to get away from the sinking day at sea ship.
Every catch share system has to be tailored to a fishery, and then also the socioeconomic goals of the people fishing in that fishery. So you need to think about what's the biology of different fish stocks, particularly when you have multiple species you're dealing with. So there's a biological tailoring, and then there's a socioeconomic tailoring. The biological tailoring is what is the sustainable level of harvest, and that's where you're setting the annual catch limits for each fish. Catch shares tend to do a lot better job than days at sea in having fishermen fish as profitably as possible while still not overfishing.
When we talk about conservation, we're really talking about the annual catch limit as the main conservation tool. Your catch share, or that part of it, has more to do with social, economic and environmental considerations. So it's not just about conservation. To say that sharing the fish is a conservation tool is misleading, and that's been recognised by the National Research Council, and lots of other people have said the part of catch shares that is about sharing the fish is not primarily a conservation tool. It's an economic allocation tool to decide who can go fishing.
People can choose to be in a sector, change sectors, or be in the common pool. And if you elect to be in a sector, you guys have a share, and then you can decide amongst yourselves how best to divide that up, what's good for you. And the idea is that this allows two things. One, for some people, this is more efficient than the day at sea system we have now. In both cases, you're part of the rebuilding program in the fishery management plan for groundfish. There's an overall annual catch limit set for the fishery. It's divided out into several things. Those who go to sectors as a group get a share of that, and those who don't go to sectors have the remainder of that and fish towards it under the existing day at sea system. And so what you have is a single rebuilding program and two ways of sharing out the annual catch limit.
At this point, most vessels are being forced into the sector plan. It really becomes kind of a system that when other people go into it, it forces everybody into it, because as people leave what we call the common pool, they take with them more and more of the quota. So the last man out can be sitting with 2% of the quota, which he now has to share with 1,000 other vessels. So as a practical matter, once it starts, it unfortunately has a snowball effect. And to us, really, I've described it as the darkest hour the fishing industry has ever seen in this area. It really is going to disrupt how people have done business in the past. People are going into it, very few are going in willingly.
We are building the train as it's going down the tracks, and we're also building the tracks. We're doing, it's an unbelievable challenge. I don't think anyone is particularly enamored by sectors as being the only solution to survivability of our groundfish fleet. The issue has been that no one has been able to come up with a better solution.